Hello everyone, Jeffery Krueger here. I just got my hands on this amazing book. This book is the first American print of this copy, The Cruise of the Challenger by Spry. This was printed in New York in 1877. This book is full of illustrations and just amazing information. Just glancing through it, I just can't wait to read it. This is going to be so interesting. There's many copies of this book, more modern prints of it that you can get your hands on and read. And I will be reading this book for the first time myself. But what I will do for you right now is I am going to read the introduction of this book. Amazing illustrations, even a map that has the whole layout of the voyage. Okay, here's the introduction. Cruise of the HMS Challenger. Introduction. Not many years ago, in fact, within the memory of the present generation, our knowledge of anything below the ocean surface was extremely indefinite and obscure. It was even asserted that the specific gravity of the water at considerable depths would be so great that any heavy weight thrown into the sea must be arrested and remain suspended forever. It was argued that no animal life could possibly exist in the depths of the great ocean, and only some 15 years ago doubts were entertained whether some starfish brought up by line from 1,200 fathoms had not attached themselves to the line on its downward or upward course. And the very nature and habits of the animal were so modified as to suit this view. There can be no doubt that the invention of ocean telegraphy first stimulated the great desire as well as the necessity for a knowledge of the contour of the bed of the ocean. To ensure success, it was essential to know the configuration and the soundings of the sea, the shape and the character of its bed, the nature of the creatures and plants that haunt its depths, and force and set of its currents, the figure and dimensions of the great ocean basins, and the temperature of the water at various depths. Interesting as were the results of the various early sounding expeditions, it was not until 1868 that anything like the systematic examination of the ocean's bed was undertaken in connection with natural history and physical geography. In that year, the Royal Society succeeded in getting H.M.S. Lightning placed at their disposal for some 6 weeks, and though for so brief a period the results were such as to give great encouragement for further investigation. Although no great depth of water was obtained in sounding, dredging was effected in 650 fathoms, a greater depth than had hitherto been attempted. The next year, 1869, the Council of the Royal Society were successful in securing the HMS Porcupine, which was fitted out for a more extended exploration of the deep sea, and the experience of the previous year was brought to bear on the improvement of the means for this purpose in view. The first cruise was between the latitudes of Cape Clear and Galway on the west coast of Ireland, where a series of soundings and dredgings were effected in 1,500 fathoms, more than double that of the previous year, and many creatures of great interest obtained. The second part of the cruise extended to the south and west end of Ireland, where a depth of 2,400 fathoms was reached with successful results, and the third part extended over some portion of the survey of the previous year, between the coast of Scotland and the Faroe Islands. On the termination of this voyage, taking into account the time occupied and the extent of the investigation, the cruise of the Porcupine was considered to have done more to advance our knowledge of the physical condition of the ocean than had been previously achieved by any former expedition that ever left our shores. In 1870, the Porcupine was again engaged in the service of the Council of the Royal Society and proceeded at first in a southwesterly direction towards the farthest point to which the survey extended to the year before, and afterwards to the coast of Portugal, and to Gibraltar, where a vast quantity of interesting and important data was obtained. In addition to the sounding and dredging, thermometric observations were constantly taken, proving even more successful than those obtained during the previous voyages. The results showed unsuspecting variations in the deep sea temperatures and the existence of a general oceanic circulation and the presence of life at the greatest depths. The scientific and practical importance of the facts revealed by these short and imperfect inquiries was such as to render the continuance a matter of national concern, so much so that the Council of the Royal Society brought before the government a project extended investigation, which was eventually approved of, and a committee appointed to prepare the plans of operation. It was suggested that a vessel should be fitted out for 3 or 4 years cruise, during which time sounding, dredging, thermometric observation, and chemical examination of seawater should be carried out on continuously, with a view to a more perfect knowledge of the physical and biological conditions of the great ocean basins, of the direction and the velocity of the great drifts and currents, of the fauna of the deep water, and of the zoology and botany of those portions of the globe which are at present comparatively unknown. H.M.S. Challenger, a spar-decked corvette of 2,000 tons displacement and 400 horsepower, was selected to carry out these recommendations, and the necessary alterations to fit her for the service on which she was to be employed were made in the dockyard at Sheerness. With the exception of 2 64-pounders, all the guns on the main deck were removed so as to obtain the required accommodations. In addition to cabins for the captain, commander, and director of the scientific staff, there were spacious compartments for surveying operations and analyzing purposes, a laboratory for the chemist, and a studio for the photographer, all fitted with every appliance which skill and science could suggest. On the upper deck stood an 18-horse double-cylinder engine with shafting and drums for heaving in the dredging and sounding lines, extending entirely across the ship and on to the after part of the deck. Besides the usual standard and other compasses was the fox dipping circle, with which it was intended to make an extensive daily series of magnetic observations. From the hydrographic department at the Admiralty, a code of instructions was issued, regulating the daily routine to be carried out whenever the weather and other circumstances permitted. The Challenger, after visiting Lisbon, Gibraltar, Madeira, was to proceed across the Atlantic Ocean through the trade wind region to the Virgin Islands, thence to Bermuda, onward to the coast of North America, and eastward again to the Azores, and thence to the Canaries, Cape de Verde, and to the equilateral regions, which were to be thoroughly investigated, westward to St. Paul's Rocks, Fernando de Noronha, and to coast of Brazil. After leaving Bahia it was desirable that the island of Trinidad, Martin Vaz, and Tristan da Cunha should be visited on the passage across the South Atlantic to the Cape of Good Hope, which it was expected would be reached at the close of 1873. From the Cape it was proposed to examine the small groups of islands of Marion and Crozet, and to visit Kerguelen Land, from which the expedition was directed to proceed as far south as safety would permit in the neighborhood of the Antarctic ice barrier, and after a short survey to sail for Melbourne, Sydney, and the ports of New Zealand. If time and other circumstances would permit, it would be intended again to proceed south for the purpose of visiting the small islands of Campbell, Macquarie, Auckland, and Sea, then north sailing to Friendly and Fiji Islands, onward through the Coral Sea, visiting the south coast of New Guinea, passing Torres Straits, the Arafura Sea, calling at Timor and Makassar, thence shaping our course through the Celebes and Lulu seas to Manila, which would probably be reached in November 1874. From Manila, the Challenger was directed to sail eastward into the Pacific, calling at those little frequented regions, the Palau Islands, New Brighton, New Ireland, and the Solomon Group, en route for Japan. After leaving Japan, a course was to be taken across the northern Pacific to Vancouver's Island, and thence southward through the eastern throe of the great ocean to Valparaiso, calling at Easter Island and Sela G. Gomez. On leaving Valparaiso, it was proposed to return to the Atlantic through the Straits of Magellan, and by Rio de Janeiro and St. Helena to England, which would probably be reached early in 1876. The globe will thus have been circumnavigated, and the great oceans traversed from north to south and from east to west. How far this program was carried out will be seen by the following chapters. And then we have, starting right in here, we have chapter 1. This is going to be a great book to read. I hope everyone gets a chance to get a copy of this and read it. Thank you for your time, and I hope I developed some interest in this topic, and have an excellent day, everyone.